There is a moment when you suddenly realize something unsettling. The people you thought were ruining your peace never actually had that power. The words that hurt you, the behaviors that angered you, the situations that seemed to push your buttons. What if none of them were the real cause? What if the trigger you've been fighting your whole life was never outside of you, but quietly living within an unconscious reaction you've never questioned? This realization can feel shocking, almost uncomfortable. Because the moment you truly understand it, something irreversible happens. No one can control your emotions ever again. Stay with this message until the end, because what you're about to hear may completely change how you respond to life, conflict, and yourself. If this resonates with you, please subscribe to Buddhism in every moment to support the channel and help us continue creating calm, powerful, and life-changing videos like this. There is a belief so deeply woven into everyday life that most people never question it. A belief that quietly steals peace, confidence, and inner freedom. The belief that other people control how you feel. From an early age, you are taught to explain your emotions through external causes. Someone disrespected you, so you became angry. Someone ignored you, so you felt hurt. Someone spoke carelessly, so your peace disappeared. Over time, this explanation becomes automatic, almost unquestionable. It sounds reasonable. It feels logical. And yet, it is the very illusion that keeps you trapped. The moment you say, "They triggered me," something subtle but powerful happens. You hand your emotional authority to something outside yourself. You declare, without realizing it, that your inner state depends on words, behaviors, and situations you do not control. This illusion is comforting at first. It gives the mind a clear target, someone to blame, something to point at. But comfort quickly turns into captivity. Because once you believe others control your emotions, you must constantly defend yourself against the world. Life becomes a series of emotional landmines. You walk carefully, hoping not to be provoked. You replay conversations, wishing people had acted differently. You wait for the world to become kinder, quieter, more understanding so that you can finally feel at ease. And the peace you are searching for never arrives. The truth is uncomfortable, but liberating. Nothing outside of you has the power to create an emotion inside you. External events may stimulate the senses, but emotions are generated internally, shaped by interpretation, memory, and conditioning. What you call a trigger is not an attack, it is an activation of something already present. A spark cannot start a fire without fuel. The spark may be someone's tone, behavior, or opinion. But the fuel is the unexamined story within the expectation, the attachment, the wound that has never been brought into awareness. Without that fuel, the spark falls harmlessly to the ground. This is why the same words can devastate one person and barely touch another. The power is not in the words. It never was. The illusion of being triggered keeps you reactive because it keeps you looking outward for solutions to an inner process. You try to change people, avoid situations, control environments. You become hypervigilant, emotionally guarded, and quietly exhausted. Yet no matter how carefully you manage the outside world, the reactions continue. Because the source was never outside. Seeing this illusion clearly does not mean dismissing your feelings. It does not mean becoming emotionally numb or pretending pain doesn't exist. It means finally understanding where your power truly lies. Your emotions are not evidence of someone else's control. They are invitations to awareness. Every moment you feel triggered is a moment revealing something within you that wants to be seen, understood, and released. Not judged, not suppressed, not projected outward. When this understanding begins to settle, something shifts. You stop seeing yourself as emotionally fragile in a hostile world. You stop fearing other people's words. You stop bracing for impact. You realize that the world has been pressing the same buttons for years, but the buttons were never installed by others. They were formed through past experiences, unhealed moments, and unconscious patterns. And patterns can be changed. This is where freedom begins. Not when the world behaves differently, but when you no longer confuse stimulation with control. When you recognize that nothing outside you can reach inside, unless something within you opens the door. The illusion of being triggered fades the moment you see it for what it is. And in its place, a quieter truth emerges, one that changes everything. Your peace has never been taken from you. It has only been misunderstood, and what is misunderstood can finally be reclaimed. There is a precise moment, often so subtle you barely notice it, when your power quietly leaves you. It happens before anger fully forms, before hurt hardens into resentment, before words escape your mouth or silence turns heavy. It happens the instant you believe that someone else has taken something from you. You may not say it out loud, but the thought appears almost automatically, "They made me feel this way." In that moment, responsibility for your inner state shifts outward. Your emotions are no longer something you experience, they become something that happened to you. And with that single belief, your power is handed over. This is not a dramatic act. There is no conscious decision. It is learned behavior, reinforced over years of conditioning. Society encourages it. Conversations normalize it. Even well-meaning advice often strengthens it. We are taught to trace our feelings back to people, events, and circumstances, rarely pausing to question what we are giving away in the process. But emotional power is never taken. It is always given. When you believe that someone else controls how you feel, you place your peace in unstable hands. You make it dependent on moods, opinions, timing, and behavior that you cannot govern. Your inner world becomes reactive, fragile, constantly adjusting to forces outside itself. And the cost of this exchange is enormous. You begin monitoring others instead of understanding yourself. You rehearse arguments that haven't happened yet. You relive conversations long after they end. You wait for apologies, explanations, or changes that may never come, believing that relief lies somewhere outside your reach. This is emotional dependency, even when it wears the mask of strength. The deeper truth is more uncomfortable, but also far more empowering. The moment you feel triggered is the moment an unexamined belief, expectation, or wound has been touched. The stimulus may be external, but the reaction is entirely internal. You were not overpowered. You were activated. And activation is not defeat, it is information. When you stop blaming the outside world for your inner reactions, something important shifts. You stop asking, "Why did they do this to me?" and begin asking, "What within me responded so strongly?" This question does not judge. It does not accuse. It opens the door to awareness. Awareness is where power returns. You start to see how often your reactions are tied to expectations you didn't know you were carrying. How quickly your mind fills in meaning that was never spoken. How old emotional patterns resurface in new situations, wearing familiar faces. This is not weakness. It is conditioning. And conditioning can be interrupted. The moment you stop assigning emotional responsibility outward, you reclaim sovereignty over your inner life. You no longer need others to behave perfectly for you to feel steady. You no longer wait for circumstances to align before allowing yourself peace. You stop living at the mercy of triggers and begin living from understanding. This does not make you emotionally distant. It makes you emotionally grounded. You still feel. You still care. But your feelings are no longer weapons that can be turned against you. They become signals, clear, honest, and manageable. You respond rather than react. You choose rather than explode. The world does not become quieter. People do not become more careful. Life does not suddenly stop challenging you. But something far more important happens. You stop giving your power away in moments you could be reclaiming it. And once you see how easily it slipped from your hands before, you begin to hold it differently. Gently, consciously, with respect for your own inner authority. This is not control. It is ownership. And ownership is the beginning of freedom. What feels like a sudden loss of control is rarely sudden at all. When you react, when anger flares, when defensiveness rises, when hurt takes over, it can feel as if a switch has been flipped without your consent. One moment you were calm, the next you are pulled into an emotional current that feels impossible to stop. You might believe you chose this reaction in the heat of the moment, but the truth is quieter and far more revealing. Reaction is not a choice. It is a habit. Long before the present moment, your mind learned patterns. It learned how to respond to certain tones, certain words, certain dynamics. These responses were formed through repetition, through experiences where reacting felt necessary for survival, protection, or belonging. Over time, they became automatic. The body remembers what the mind no longer questions. This is why reactions arrive so quickly, faster than thought, faster than logic, faster than intention. You are not responding to what is happening now. You are reliving something old. The present moment merely presses a familiar button. The reaction that follows belongs to memory, not reality. It is the echo of a past moment that was never fully processed, never fully understood, never fully released. This is what makes reactions feel so powerful. They are fueled by emotional muscle memory. The nervous system recognizes a pattern and responds before awareness has time to intervene. And because the reaction feels immediate and intense, it convinces you that it must be justified. But intensity does not equal truth. If reactions were true reflections of the present, they would be consistent across people. The same words would produce the same emotions. The same situations would provoke the same responses. But they do not. One person remains steady where another explodes. One feels attacked where another feels indifferent. The difference is not strength or weakness. It is conditioning. Reactions are learned behaviors, reinforced through time. And what is learned can be unlearned not through force, but through understanding. The first step is recognizing that reacting does not mean something is wrong with you. It means something familiar has been touched. A boundary, a belief, a wound, a story you've carried longer than you realize. When you see reaction as habit rather than failure, shame dissolves. You stop judging yourself for feeling what you feel. You stop believing that emotional surges define who you are. You begin to see them as signals, not commands. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Instead of asking, "Why did I react like that?" with frustration, you begin asking it with curiosity. What pattern was activated? What memory was echoed? What expectation was silently violated? These questions do not trap you in the past, they loosen its grip. Because habits thrive in unconsciousness. Awareness weakens them. The moment you recognize a reaction as a pattern, you create distance between yourself and the behavior. That distance is not detachment from life, it is reconnection to choice. You are no longer inside the reaction, you are observing it. And observation interrupts automation. This is where true change begins. Not by suppressing reactions or demanding emotional perfection, but by patiently witnessing the habits that once ran your inner world unnoticed. You begin to understand that reacting quickly was once a form of intelligence. It kept you safe. It helped you navigate uncertainty. But what once protected you may now be limiting you. The goal is not to eliminate reaction overnight. The goal is to stop letting habit decide your present. When reaction is seen clearly, it loses authority. It no longer defines the moment. It becomes something you experience, rather than something you obey. And in that shift from habit to awareness, you begin to reclaim the space where freedom lives. There is a space so small that most people never notice it, yet it holds more power than any reaction you have ever had. It exists between what happens and what you do about it, between a word spoken and the emotion that follows, between a situation unfolding and the story your mind is about to tell. This space is the pause. Most suffering begins because this pause is overlooked. Life moves quickly, the mind reacts faster, and emotion rushes in before awareness has time to arrive. A comment lands, a tone shifts, a moment feels threatening, and the reaction fires automatically, as it always has. But that reaction is not inevitable. Between stimulus and response, there is always a moment of openness. It may last only a breath, but within that breath lies your freedom. The pause is not about stopping emotion. It is about allowing awareness to enter before habit takes over. When you learn to recognize this pause, something remarkable happens. You realize that no one and nothing can force you to react. You may feel emotion rising, but you are no longer compelled to act from it. You are no longer dragged by it. You are witnessing it. This witnessing changes the entire dynamic. The pause creates distance, not distance from life, but distance from unconscious behavior. It allows the nervous system to settle just enough for clarity to emerge. In that brief stillness, you are no longer inside the storm. You are standing at its edge. Most people believe strength means responding quickly, defending immediately, proving oneself in the moment. But true strength lives in restraint, in choosing not to add energy to what does not deserve it, in allowing the mind to settle before it speaks. The pause is not passive. It is intentional. It is the moment you reclaim authorship of your actions. Instead of reacting from memory, you respond from presence. Instead of repeating an old pattern, you create a new possibility. This does not mean emotions disappear. They may still arise with force. But when the pause is honored, emotions lose their authority to command behavior. They become experiences rather than directives. In this space, you begin to see options you never noticed before. Silence instead of argument. Curiosity instead of defense. Compassion instead of judgment. Or simply no response at all, because not everything requires one. The pause teaches you that freedom is not found in controlling others, but in governing yourself. It shows you that peace is not something you must protect aggressively. It is something you allow by not reacting unnecessarily. This is why the pause feels sacred. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is honest. It brings you back to yourself before the world pulls you outward. At first, this pause may feel uncomfortable. You may worry that you are losing ground, missing opportunities, or appearing weak. But over time, you will notice something else happening. Your reactions soften. Your words become fewer but truer. Your energy is preserved instead of scattered. And slowly, the world begins to lose its ability to disturb you. Not because life stops testing you, but because you stop meeting every test with unconscious urgency. The pause does not remove challenges. It removes the need to fight them reflexively. And in that quiet, intentional space, you discover something most people never experience: the freedom to choose who you are in each moment. That freedom was always there. It was just waiting for you to pause long enough to notice it. Most people don't realize the moment they lose their peace. It doesn't happen when emotion arises. It happens when emotion is taken inside and mistaken for identity. A feeling appears: anger, hurt, frustration, fear, and without noticing, you absorb it. You say, "I am angry," instead of anger is present. You merge with the emotion, letting it color your thoughts, your words, your posture, your decisions. The emotion stops being an experience and starts becoming who you are in that moment. This is where suffering deepens. Emotions are not dangerous by nature. They are movements of energy, signals passing through the body and mind. What gives them power is absorption. The moment you absorb an emotion, you hand it authority. It begins directing your behavior, shaping your narrative, and convincing you that it speaks truth. But emotions are not truth. They are weather. They change. They rise and fall. They move through awareness and dissolve if they are allowed to. When you observe an emotion instead of absorbing it, you give it space to complete its natural cycle. Observation is not detachment from life. It is intimacy without possession. To observe means to stay present with what you feel without becoming it. You notice the heat of anger without acting from it. You feel sadness without drowning in it. You sense fear without letting it decide for you. You allow the experience while maintaining your center. This is not suppression. Suppression pushes emotions down and gives them more power later. Observation does the opposite. It brings emotions into the light of awareness, where they soften. When you observe, you are no longer trapped inside the emotion story. You don't argue with it. You don't justify it. You don't shame yourself for feeling it. You simply witness it with honesty and patience. And something remarkable happens. The emotion begins to loosen. Because emotions cannot survive without identification. They need resistance or indulgence to stay alive. Observation gives them neither. It offers calm attention, and calm attention dissolves intensity. This is why two people can experience the same situation so differently. One absorbs the emotion and becomes consumed by it. The other observes it and remains steady. The difference is not personality. It is relationship. When you practice observing rather than absorbing, your inner world becomes spacious. You stop feeling hijacked by your own reactions. You discover that emotions no longer dictate your actions unless you invite them to. This is where triggers lose their power. A trigger relies on absorption. It relies on the mind saying, "This feeling is me. This reaction is necessary." When that belief is removed, the trigger has nowhere to land. You may still feel emotion, but you are no longer pulled into it. This practice changes how you move through life. Conversations become calmer. Conflicts become shorter. Your energy stays intact. You stop replaying moments in your head because nothing was absorbed deeply enough to scar. Most importantly, you stop fearing your emotions. You trust yourself to feel without losing control. You trust awareness to hold what arises. And that trust becomes a quiet strength, one that cannot be shaken by circumstances or people. Observing is an act of respect toward yourself. It says, "I am bigger than this moment." It says, "I can feel without falling apart." And in that stance, peace becomes natural, not because emotions disappear, but because they no longer own you. You remain present. You remain whole. And nothing that passes through you is strong enough to take that away. Most emotional reactions do not come from what is happening. They come from what you expected to happen. You may not notice these expectations at first. They are quiet, hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. Expectations about how people should speak to you, how situations should unfold, how much respect you deserve, how quickly things should resolve, how others should understand you without explanation. And when reality fails to match these silent agreements, something inside you tightens. This tightening is what many people experience as being triggered. But the true source is attachment. Attachment to being understood. Attachment to being treated a certain way. Attachment to outcomes, timing, validation, fairness. When these attachments are strong, even small deviations feel personal. A careless comment feels like disrespect. A delay feels like rejection. A disagreement feels like a threat. The reaction is not about the moment, it is about the gap between expectation and reality. Detachment is what closes that gap. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop gripping. It means you allow life to be as it is without demanding that it conform to your internal rules. You release the belief that your peace depends on people behaving correctly or circumstances aligning perfectly. This release is not coldness. It is relief. When you loosen attachment, you stop needing the world to validate your inner state. You stop requiring others to protect your peace for you. You become emotionally independent in the truest sense, not isolated, but grounded. Triggers feed on attachment. They rely on the belief that something external owes you a certain response. When that belief dissolves, the trigger loses its foundation. There is nothing left to defend. You begin to see how often reactions were attempts to restore control, to correct reality, to force alignment, and how exhausting that effort was. Detachment allows you to meet life with openness instead of resistance. You still notice what happens. You still care deeply. But you no longer collapse inward when expectations are unmet. You adjust instead of react. This shift transforms relationships. You listen without bracing. You speak without demanding agreement. You give without keeping score. And when disappointment arises, it passes through instead of settling in. Detachment also brings clarity. When you are not entangled in how things should be, you see how things actually are. You respond from truth rather than defense. Your words carry less urgency and more honesty. Your silence becomes intentional instead of resentful. Most importantly, detachment returns ownership of peace to where it belongs. Inside you. You realize that no one can trigger you unless you are clinging to something that feels threatened. When there is nothing to grip, there is nothing to lose. When there is nothing to defend, there is nothing to attack. This does not make you passive. It makes you free. Free to engage without being consumed. Free to care without suffering. Free to move through life without being pulled off balance by every shift in the external world. Detachment is not the absence of love. It is love without fear. And when fear leaves, triggers have nowhere to survive. What remains is steadiness, a quiet, unshakable presence that does not depend on circumstances. That steadiness is your true power. There is a reason some emotions seem to grow the moment you respond to them. Anger intensifies when it is defended. Resentment deepens when it is justified. Conflict expands when it is fueled. This is not coincidence. It is mechanics. Emotions behave like fire. They require fuel to stay alive. Reaction is that fuel. Every time you argue internally, replay the moment, explain yourself, or strike back, whether out loud or silently, you add energy to the flame. What could have burned out on its own becomes something that lingers, spreads, and consumes far more than it ever needed to. Most people believe reacting is how you protect yourself. That responding immediately shows strength, intelligence, or self-respect. But what it often shows is unconscious participation. You step into the fire believing you must fight it, unaware that your movement is what keeps it burning. The moment you stop feeding the fire, something unexpected happens. The emotion weakens. Not because you suppressed it, but because you refused to nourish it. You did not argue with it. You did not dramatize it. You did not give it a story to live inside. You simply allowed it to exist without interference. This feels unnatural at first. The mind is used to engagement. It wants to explain, defend, retaliate, or fix. Silence can feel like surrender. Non-reaction can feel like loss. But silence, when chosen consciously, is not weakness. It is containment. When you stop feeding the fire, you protect your energy. You prevent emotional leakage. You stop paying attention to what does not deserve your life force. You realize that not every spark requires your involvement, and not every provocation deserves your response. This restraint creates power, not power over others. but power over yourself. In moments where you once reacted instantly, you now pause. You feel the urge rise, but you do not obey it. You allow the emotion to peak and fall without becoming action. And in that process, the fire loses oxygen. It burns out. What remains afterward is clarity. You see the situation without distortion. You understand that much of the intensity was never about the present moment. It was about past conditioning, unmet expectations, or the ego's desire to be right. When you refuse to react, you deprive those forces of expression. Over time, this practice changes your inner landscape. You become less predictable not to others, but to your own habits. The same triggers no longer produce the same reactions. Situations that once hijacked your mood now pass through without impact. Your nervous system learns that it is safe not to engage. This is emotional maturity. It does not require you to tolerate disrespect or deny your truth. It requires discernment, knowing when action is necessary and when reaction is harmful. Knowing the difference between responding from clarity and reacting from heat. When you stop feeding emotional fires, your presence becomes steady. People feel it. Situations shift. Conflict loses momentum because it cannot sustain itself without participation. Most importantly, you conserve your energy for what truly matters. Peace does not come from winning every emotional battle. It comes from choosing which battles never deserved your energy at all. The fire only burns as long as you feed it. And the moment you stop, it fades quietly, naturally, leaving you standing in your own strength, untouched. There is a war that drains more energy than any external conflict. It is not fought with words. It is not visible to anyone else, and yet it quietly consumes the mind from the inside. It is the war against reality. This war begins the moment you decide that what is happening should not be happening. When emotions arise and you label them wrong, when circumstances unfold and you resist them internally, when life presents what it presents and the mind tightens, arguing, judging, rejecting. I shouldn't feel this way. This shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't be like this. Each of these thoughts is an act of resistance. And resistance is what keeps suffering alive. Acceptance is often misunderstood because people think it means agreeing with pain, excusing behavior, or giving up the desire for change. But acceptance is none of these things. Acceptance is not approval. It is clarity. Acceptance is the moment you stop fighting what already exists. When you accept an emotion, you are not saying it is permanent. You are saying it is present. When you accept a situation, you are not saying it is ideal. You are saying it is real. This simple shift from resistance to recognition changes everything. Because emotions do not need to be defeated. They need to be allowed. When you resist an emotion, you trap it inside the body. It has nowhere to go. It circulates, intensifies, and begins to define your inner experience. Resistance turns passing feelings into prolonged suffering. But when you allow an emotion to be fully felt without judgment, it begins to soften. The nervous system recognizes that it is no longer under threat. The emotion completes its cycle. It moves through instead of settling in. This is how the inner war ends. Acceptance removes the fuel of conflict. There is no longer an enemy to fight, no longer a story to defend. What remains is experience, raw, honest, and temporary. And in that honesty, peace emerges. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you stop exhausting yourself by opposing it. You stop wasting energy wishing reality were different. You redirect that energy toward understanding and wise action. Acceptance also reveals a deeper truth. Much of what you called suffering was actually resistance. The pain was real, but the struggle around it was optional. The moment you stop tightening against what is, the moment you stop demanding that emotions disappear before they are understood, The intensity drops. You are no longer at war with yourself. This does not make you passive. On the contrary, acceptance is what allows effective action. When you are no longer clouded by resistance, you see more clearly. You respond with intelligence instead of impulse. You choose your next step without emotional noise. Acceptance creates space. In that space, emotions no longer control you. They inform you. They pass through awareness without leaving scars. You stop fearing them because you know they cannot stay forever when they are not resisted. This is why acceptance is so powerful. It ends the inner war by removing the battlefield. When there is no resistance, there is no conflict. When there is no conflict, there is clarity. And when there is clarity, peace is no longer something you chase. It is something you stand in. Acceptance does not change life. It changes your relationship with life. And that change is what finally frees you. Understanding brings clarity. But clarity alone does not create freedom. Freedom is built through training. The mind that reacts automatically did not become that way overnight. It was shaped through repetition, thousands of moments, where awareness arrived too late, where habit stepped in first, where emotion dictated action. And just as these patterns were learned, they can be relearned, but only through practice. This is where many people become discouraged. They understand the ideas. They recognize the pause. They see the illusion. And yet, in real moments of stress, the old reactions return. The voice rises. The body tightens. The familiar emotional surge takes over. This does not mean you are failing. It means the training has just begun. Being untriggerable is not a personality trait. It is a skill. And like any skill, it strengthens through consistent, patient repetition. Each moment of awareness, no matter how small, is a rep that rewires the mind. The practice begins with noticing. Noticing when the body tightens. Noticing when the breath shortens. Noticing when the familiar emotional pattern starts to rise. You may still react at first, but even noticing after the reaction is progress. Awareness does not demand perfection. It only asks for honesty. Over time, that awareness arrives sooner. You begin catching the reaction as it forms, not after it explodes. You notice the urge before the words. You sense the emotional wave before it breaks. And in that early recognition, choice quietly returns. This is how the pause grows. The pause does not appear fully formed. It expands with practice. One breath today becomes 2 breaths tomorrow. One moment of restraint becomes a new default over time. The nervous system learns that it no longer needs to react immediately to stay safe. This training requires compassion. If you judge yourself harshly for reacting, you strengthen the very patterns you are trying to dissolve. Shame tightens the mind. Patience softens it. Every reaction is simply information about where awareness has not yet settled. Training the mind means meeting yourself exactly where you are. Some days you will remain calm with ease. Other days, old habits will surface unexpectedly. Neither defines you. What defines the process is your willingness to return to awareness again and again. This return is the practice. You do not train the mind only in moments of conflict. You train it in stillness, in silence, in ordinary moments when nothing is wrong. By learning to rest in presence when life is calm, you build the capacity to remain present when life is challenging. Small daily practices matter more than dramatic breakthroughs. Pausing before speaking. Taking one conscious breath when tension appears. Letting an urge pass without acting on it. These moments accumulate quietly, reshaping the inner landscape. Gradually, reactions lose urgency. Triggers lose intensity. Situations that once dominated your emotional world pass through without leaving a mark. You begin responding from clarity instead of habit. And then, one day, something becomes clear. The same situation that once would have pulled you into reaction no longer has access to you. The words still arrive. The stimulus still exists, but the old response is absent, not suppressed, not avoided, simply no longer needed. This is the result of training, not the elimination of emotion, but the cultivation of mastery. You feel without being controlled. You engage without being consumed. You remain open without being vulnerable to every passing stimulus. Being untriggerable does not mean nothing affects you. It means nothing owns you. And that freedom earned through patience, awareness, and gentle persistence is one of the most profound forms of strength a human being can develop. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is steady. And once it is established, it changes how you move through every moment of life. There comes a moment when something fundamental shifts inside you. Not because the world has become quieter. Not because people have changed. Not because life has finally become fair or predictable. But because nothing outside of you has the power it once did. You still encounter disagreement. You still face uncertainty. You still move through moments that would once have unsettled you. And yet, something is different. You are no longer pulled. This is the moment when you realize that emotional freedom was never about mastering others, winning arguments, or controlling circumstances. It was about reclaiming authorship of your inner life. It was about no longer outsourcing your peace to things that were never designed to hold it. When nothing outside controls you, your presence changes. You listen more than you defend. You speak less, but with greater precision. You act when action is needed and remain still when it is not. There is no urgency to prove yourself, no compulsion to react, no need to protect an identity that once felt fragile. You are grounded enough to allow moments to pass without turning them into meaning, conflict, or memory. This does not make you passive. It makes you sovereign. You begin to see how much energy was once spent on reactions that led nowhere. How many moments were clouded by emotion instead of clarity? How often peace was delayed by the belief that it depended on something external changing first? That belief quietly dissolves. In its place emerges a steadiness that cannot be shaken by opinion, pressure, or provocation. Not because you have hardened yourself against the world, but because you have softened it into truth. You understand now that freedom is not emotional numbness. It is emotional independence. You feel fully without being ruled. You care deeply without being consumed. You engage without losing yourself. This is real power. Power that does not dominate. Power that does not demand. Power that does not react. It is the power of restraint, of discernment, of knowing when to speak and when silence serves more, of choosing peace not because it is easy, but because it is wise. When nothing outside controls you, relationships shift naturally. Conflict loses momentum. Drama finds no foothold. People sense the steadiness in you and respond differently, not because you are trying to influence them, but because your presence is no longer reactive. Life continues to move. Challenges still appear, but they arrive without the chaos they once carried. You meet them from clarity. This is not a destination you reach once and never revisit. It is a way of living that deepens with time. Each moment of awareness reinforces it. Each pause strengthens it. Each choice to respond rather than react anchors it more firmly within you. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this freedom is how quiet it is. There is no announcement, no applause, no visible transformation to explain. Only a subtle knowing that you are no longer at the mercy of what happens around you. You belong to yourself again. When nothing outside controls you, life does not become smaller. It becomes spacious. And in that space, you finally live not as a reaction to the world, but as a grounded presence within it. There is a quiet thread running through this entire journey, one that gently rewrites how we understand power, emotion, and freedom. At the beginning, It may have felt confronting to hear that no one can truly trigger you. For many of us, emotions have always seemed like reactions forced upon us by people, situations, or circumstances beyond our control. But as the story unfolded, a deeper truth revealed itself. What we call being triggered is not an attack from the outside, it is a habit from within. A learned reaction, shaped by memory, expectation, and unexamined attachment. We saw how easily power is given away the moment we believe someone else controls how we feel. We explored how reactions are not choices in the moment, but patterns built over time. We discovered the sacred pause, the small, often overlooked space where freedom lives. We learned to observe emotions instead of absorbing them, to let feelings pass through awareness without becoming our identity. We saw how attachment fuels triggers, how reaction feeds emotional fires, and how acceptance ends the exhausting inner war. Finally, we arrived at the understanding that emotional freedom is not accidental, it is trained, practiced, and strengthened through patience and compassion. The heart of this story is not about becoming unfeeling or detached from life. It is about becoming sovereign within it. When nothing outside controls your inner state, you are no longer living in defense. You are living from clarity. You feel deeply, but you are not ruled by what you feel. You care, but you do not cling. You respond when wisdom calls for action, and you remain still when reaction would only create harm. The deepest lesson here is this: peace is not something the world gives you when it behaves correctly. Peace is something you cultivate when you stop demanding that reality protect your emotions. True strength is not found in reacting quickly or proving yourself, it is found in awareness, restraint, and understanding.